to Xavier Health at Xavier University, and welcome to the August 3rd Thursday Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Michelle Rich, and I am the Associate Director of Program Development for Xavier Health. The goal of our Lunch and Learn series is to advance your awareness of the driving forces you manage every day so you can lead with wisdom what would otherwise take a career to gain. Sounds pretty impressive, right? But what does that really mean? We bring topics to you that you normally don't think about and can increase your awareness of things that impact your organization and influence the work you do each day. Our mission is to inspire a collaboration, lead innovation, and make a difference. I would like to point out, though, that the Lunch and Learn series is just one of the programs we lead. We have over 150 industry professionals and FDA officials engaged with us on various working teams, committees, and boards through all of the conferences and initiatives and the professional development opportunities that you see listed here. Our focus is on pharma and device, but we often bring the two together within things such as the AI Summit, which is being held next month, as well as the Combination Product Summit we have every September, our in-depth How-to Cybersecurity Summit every October, this Lunch and Learn series, which you see highlighted because that's what you're involved with today, as well as multiple other initiatives. And I'd like to bring your attention also to a wealth of resources that we have through our online or on-demand webinar toolbox, where we will be adding the first webinars in a cyber series. So hopefully you'll be able to check that out. But through all of our events and initiatives, we are inspiring collaboration, leading innovation, and making a difference. So before I begin, I'd like to say that today's webinar is being recorded. The recording and slides will be available on our website soon after the webinar. So we'll end with a Q&A session today. So please send your questions to me throughout the webinar as you think of them. Don't wait till the very end. This will allow us to queue them up and roll right along. Use the question tab in your GoToWebinar panel to send your questions. And they will come directly to me, so they'll not disturb or distract our speaker. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day. So we're extremely excited to have Jerry Bessette joining us, and I'm sure you will agree as you listen to his background. He has an extremely interesting background. Jerry is currently an Associate Director in Navigant Information Security Services Group based in Washington, D.C. And he recently retired from the FBI after a highly successful 24-year career as a special agent and executive manager, where he held numerous leadership positions all over the country. His most recent assignment was as a member of the Senior Executive Services and the FBI Cyber Division, where he was the Chief of the Technical Operations Section. And in that capacity, his team developed threat-agnostic tools to counter the cyber adversary and manage the FBI's National Cyber Incident Response Program. He also supervised the FBI's National Forensic Incident Response Team, managed the international cyber agents, and had oversight for the 56 FBI cyber task forces around the country. I had no idea there were that many task forces in the FBI, so that was interesting to me. But last but not least, he led the FBI investigation into the North Korean destructive cyber attack against Sony in 2014. So we are extremely excited to have your vast amount of experience. So welcome, Jerry. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
And thank you for that kind introduction, and I'm happy to be here today to speak with you and all the attendees.
Fantastic. Well, we brought you here so we could talk about key learning. Since you have experience with so many different industries, we'd like to learn about what those key learnings are. And so we'll hop right into our very first question. As you look at your experience and over all of these industries, where do you think the medical device and pharma industries fall regarding cybersecurity preparedness?
The medical device and pharma industries, unfortunately, I think are lagging behind. They've recently become the target of many of the cyber criminals out there. The cyber criminals continue to shift their focus of attacks as they find new vulnerable areas where they can reap information and rewards. And medical devices in the pharma industry have increasingly become the target of hackers. They're after sensitive information, and the risks are growing rapidly as the technology advances. Devices that are developed for noble purposes, such as insulin pumps, heart monitors, X-ray communication systems, and a vast assortment of other medical devices have proven vulnerable to cyber attack by security researchers And recent reports also confirm that hospital medical devices are now being used by cyber criminals as stepping stones to make an intrusion into a network in the hospital and then move laterally to where where the data is that the cyber criminals want. These attackers are able to do that because of poor cyber threat monitoring. There's a lack of cohesive cybersecurity policies and data access controls within the medical device industry, and then disposal of the medical devices when they're no longer needed. Trend Micro is a recognized cybersecurity organization, and they recently conducted a study which revealed that more than 36,000 healthcare devices in the United States alone, not counting Europe and the rest of the world, are easily discoverable by a tool called Shodan, which is a search engine for connected devices. So people can easily look around and see that these devices are beaconing and use them as an attack vector. More research conducted by Trend Micro revealed that a large portion of exposed healthcare systems still use outdated operating systems. They're operating systems on the medical devices that are no longer receiving security updates, and that makes them more vulnerable to attack and as an entry point for stealing sensitive medical records or even conducting a devastating ransomware attack. Medical devices have been on the market for years, but their defenses really need to be upgraded. The people that operate the devices and the patients need security training, and there needs to be some mechanisms implemented for downloading security updates and patches. Hackers are increasingly taking advantage of the lack of security on these embedded devices and can use common attacks, web application attacks, where they access information through third-party applications that are put on the devices to help them function, and they can steal information, or they can potentially lock a device down and hold the patient or the hospital for ransom, for monetary gain. With the increase of attacks on medical devices and pharmaceutical organizations, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is releasing new guidelines that encourage medical device makers to implement practices to improve cybersecurity on their products. And they're also recommending that these medical device manufacturers and operators implement one policy for cybersecurity. So the same thing they would use for their own corporate IT, legal, and compliance should be used for medical devices. And that way they will, have better threat intelligence and better cybersecurity and updating on the devices.
That's great. Thank you so much. So what do you think some of the driving forces are that are moving the medical device industry to increase focus in cybersecurity?
Well, obviously the driving forces, one of the main ones, is the risk. The recent Petya ransomware attacks that occurred largely impacted the business of the medical industry. And more security researchers are confirming that medical devices in the healthcare sector in general are behind in cybersecurity when it comes to preventing cyber attacks. The devices, like I said, have and many times are outdated and they have no software updates, which makes them more vulnerable. A recent survey of 500 medical device manufacturers and healthcare providers finds that 2/3 of the manufacturers and more than half of the providers believe that there's going to be a major cyber attack on a medical device in the next year. So this concern of a major attack coming has encouraged the medical device industry to shift towards a security-first design and try to keep security at the forefront of all new medical devices. Security is always difficult. Security is expensive. And most people in the cybersecurity industry, like myself, recommend that whether you are in the medical device industry, the financial industry, whatever type of industry you are, security is always better when it's security by design. So as you develop these devices, if you develop them with an eye towards cybersecurity, it's much easier to implement that cybersecurity. But unfortunately, what happens in reality is that technology is developed and then people realize they have to go back and secure it. It's also important to note that the information put out by the Food and Drug Administration is guidance on how to secure your devices. They don't actually conduct the testing themselves, the FDA, nor do they conduct the software design. The testing and design is all the responsibility of the manufacturer of the device. And devices with features like wireless connectivity, remote monitoring, near-field communication, they all allow the health professionals to adjust and fine-tune the implanted devices, but they also create a point of exposure to attack by cyber criminals.
That is awesome insight. It sounds like we're having to recognize that even our suppliers have to be working with us too in order to set these things up from the very beginning then.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a team approach. Everybody that's involved in the medical device industry, whether you be the company that is manufacturing the device, the medical facility that is implanting the device or monitoring it, everyone has a role in the cybersecurity chain, and they all have a responsibility in securing the devices. And so as more and more notoriety is brought to the vulnerabilities of these devices and actual compromises of these devices, I think there becomes a greater focus on cybersecurity. And hopefully we'll see, specific cybersecurity guidelines. Right now, there's no industry-specific guidelines for medical devices. Folks are generally using NIST standards, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the cybersecurity framework. But there are organizations that are beginning to recommend that healthcare-specific cybersecurity guidelines or frameworks are developed for medical devices, as they are for other industries.
Very interesting. And I imagine that's the same with pharma as well. So would you think that the medical device and pharmaceutical industries would be able to follow similar guidelines, or would they need to be looking at specific things to their own industry?
I think though there are similarities, I think they're both individually unique. The medical devices are constantly communicating with the command and control systems to ensure that the appropriate dosages are being dispensed through those devices and the appropriate data is being fed back to treat the patient. In the pharmaceutical industry, I think it's more so a case of protection of intellectual property and the composition of the actual pharmaceuticals, especially when they're within their patent protection. I think it's the first 20 years. And so that's kind of a different approach to that. But in terms of automated dispensing of pharmaceuticals, which we see a lot now, also you see in long-term care facilities and hospitals, robotic dispensing of pharmaceuticals, that's another area where there's a risk and concern, whether it be too much or too little medicine is dispensed.
Great. So what are some of the examples of compromised security of medical devices and pharmaceuticals that you have seen? And if you know, what is the impact been on patients?
Sure. So as we stated previously, many of these implanted medical devices are very, very vulnerable to cyber attack. In a recent investigation on next generation implantable cardiac defibrillators, British and Belgian researchers found security flaws in the proprietary communications protocols of 10 different types of implantable cardioverter defibrillators currently on the market. Another recent investigation revealed that a hospital in Miami was hit by data breaches after it was infected with malware that entered into the network via medical devices that had back doors implanted on them. And then once the malware was inputted into the network via the medical devices, it was able to move within the healthcare network of the hospital and steal proprietary information. The hospital's devices included a blood gas analyzer, a picture archive communication system, an X-ray system. They all were infiltrated with malware. The blood gas analyzer, in fact, even had a firewall on it and was capable of different types of detection and endpoint security. But because its software was infected with a backdoor, the malware was able to evade those detection systems. And then the hospital's data was actually being shipped electronically and digitally out to China via an secure socket layer encrypted port. For what purpose the Chinese wanted that information, it's unknown. Another example, a pharmaceutical company confirmed that its power injector systems used in U.S. hospitals to improve the imaging of MRIs had been attacked by the WannaCry ransomware. That's the recent ransomware attack that over a weekend received a lot of notoriety. Many more victims fell prey to the WannaCry ransomware in Europe than in the United States. And the main reason that that attack was so successful was outdated software. As technology continues to advance, in the case of the WannaCry attack, it was Windows XP software that wasn't patched. Microsoft stopped supporting Windows XP in 2014, and I believe there were 287 known vulnerabilities. And as new patches come out for new operating systems, cyber criminals are aware of these patches because they're published on the internet, and then they take the patches and they identify what vulnerability that patch is supposed to fix, and they go back and they test that against previous operating systems that are no longer supported, and that's how they were able to infect all these different medical devices and other hospitals with the WannaCry ransomware. There was also a cyber attack in a major UK hospital last year that shut down all the MRI machines, the insulin pumps, and the pacemaker devices, which connected with systems at home to monitor the rhythms of hearts and feed that information back to the doctors. So despite the fact that some of these devices are equipped with firewalls, they're not too hard to evade. So because they're running on unsupported operating systems, and so it's catching and keeping your security updated is very key.
Great. So in your mind, what are some of the key strategies that can be learned from other industries to decrease the risk of cybersecurity threats?
Sure. There's probably a whole bunch of them, and the cybersecurity strategies. Other industries have been at this for a long time. The financial industry is one that has been the victim of many cyber attacks over the years. But the first line of defense is going to be the human line of defense. We really want to focus on training our employees, and so they are aware of the risks involved with everything they do in the monitoring of these devices and in the pharmaceutical industry. Every time they get on the internet, they're exposing themselves to risk. Every time they go into their email box. So they have to be constantly vigilant for any sort of attack that may be coming their way. And that's, you teach them that vigilance through constant training and reinforcement on the different types of attacks that cyber criminals use. The next main area to look at is vet your partners. If you look at some of the historical large data breaches back in 2013 and 2014, the Target breach and the Home Depot breach, both of which the CEOs and CIOs ended up resigning from those companies. Those hackers gained access into those networks through third-party vendors. So you really have to vet anybody that has access through your networks. And in my own experience in the past 12 months working at Navigant Consulting, we did somewhere between 300 to 400 incident responses last year. And many of them involved the medical industry. And the medical industry, inherent to it is that there's many people logging into networks. You have the medical transcriptionists, you have a hospital which may have taken a patient in through the emergency room and now wants to access the records from that patient's normal physician, or you may have a patient who's seeing a physician or been admitted to the emergency room and now needs to be referred for specialty treatment. So there's a constant flow of sensitive digital information going back and forth between many different people. And so you really, it's important that not only does your own organization have, the best cybersecurity that you can have, but you really have to ask questions about what type of cybersecurity do other people have. One of the most common attacks we're seeing right now on medical facilities is what's called the RDP, the Remote Desktop Protocol Server, where doctors and third parties are allowed to log into a network from home or from other facilities to gain access to records that they need to do their job. And hackers know that. And so they're conducting brute force attacks and just using automated programs to roll through a series of passwords and logons and until they're lucky enough to hit the right one and get access into the network. Along those same lines, I mentioned earlier about security by design. As the workforce becomes more and more remote, so will the workforce in the medical industry. And so people in the medical industry need to plan for that. They need to build security into networks under the assumption that there's going to be all these different folks logging in from off-site, from outside the hospital or outside the doctor's office. They need to remain up to date on constant cyber trends. You need to have someone that's responsible for cybersecurity and threat intelligence, and try to learn from the hacks that other people unfortunately have fell victim to. There's many different security agencies. I mentioned Trend Micro, McAfee, Navigant. We put out our own cyber intelligence report. I would highly recommend that these agencies review as many of these reports as possible and ensure that the way that hackers were able to obtain access to other networks, that vulnerability does not exist within their network. And then you also have to plan for the eventuality that you will be hacked. So you should ensure that you have an incident response plan and a backup, and that if your networks were being held for ransom or unavailable, if you did become victim to an attack, what are you going to do? How are you going to restore connectivity, restore access to the networks, restore connectivity to the medical devices? So you also have to plan for the fact that you may actually be hacked, and what would you do if you are hacked? And then lastly, as a member of the medical community, you should really be an advocate for industry-specific frameworks that they be developed and implemented across the medical device and pharmaceutical industries, that cybersecurity guidelines and rules and templates be developed specific to your industry to enable better protection.
That's great, Jerry. I'm waiting to see if there are any questions, but I have a couple while we're seeing if anyone else would like to ask any. You'd mentioned basically cybersecurity has no borders. So what do you see? Are there any differences or major gaps in cybersecurity preparedness on the international front for those who have global companies?
You know, cybersecurity is a global problem. Some of the difficulties that come into cybersecurity when you're dealing internationally is that, you know, the European Union has one set of rules for privacy and data protection. The United States has one, and all the other major countries in the world have their rules and regulations. And then there's different operating networks that everybody operates on. And information is exchanged back and forth. So yeah, the more global you are, I think the more difficult a challenge cybersecurity becomes because of the different laws and the different operating systems and networks that are out there.
Okay, so I do have a question also. Who is responsible, the end user or the device manufacturer, when a device is using something like Windows XP, but the system was purchased long before Microsoft stopped supporting XP? So from a device manufacturer standpoint, it may or may not be possible to upgrade the device operating system based on hardware requirements required for new operating systems. Can you comment on that?
I would say, you know, and really according to FDA guidelines, the manufacturer is responsible for the software design and the testing of the device. And so along those lines, I would hold the manufacturer responsible. If that device is implanted, the device has to be maintained. There has to be some connectivity to a medical facility where they're evaluating the results. And so I think there would be opportunities to update those devices if that was built into it by design. But I don't think you can hold, most certainly the patient has some responsibility to ask questions about, you know, what is the operating system on the device that's being implanted into my body? And how often is that operating system updated? And if it's not being updated, why not? But I think it's the responsibility of the manufacturer. I don't believe you can hold the patient responsible.
sounds about right. So thank you so much. Do you have any other parting points or any visions that you want to share with everyone listening in?
I just think, I need to emphasize the fact that everybody, can fall victim to a cyber attack. The cyber criminals, it's amazing at how hard people work at not working. And they are, if they put 25% of their effort that they put into their criminal activities towards noble and good purposes, I think we'd have a much better world. So unfortunately, people need to plan for the eventuality that they will be hacked and know what they're going to do. It's as I get on these phone calls with medical facilities that have been hacked, it doesn't happen on Tuesday at noon. Typically, it happens on Friday at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, or on a Sunday afternoon when a doctor tries to log in and access a series of records and they realize that their whole network has been compromised. So decide what you're going to do beforehand. Teams should be getting together and ensuring that, one, they do have a plan in place. And if they do have a plan, that it covers all the potential risks that they could be exposed to. And then if they have a good plan and it covers everything they need to cover, have they ever rehearsed it? Because when you hear the desperation in the voices of the people on the phone that have been hacked at 10 o'clock at night or, 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, it's you wish there was more you can do for them. But once the cyber criminals are in the network, they're in the network. And I think we've been fortunate up to now. There's no, loss of life that I know of from an affected medical device, but I think that's going to be a serious game changer. Once, you can, with 100% assurity say that, an individual passed away because their pacemaker stopped functioning as the result of a malware attack, I think that's probably going to be a significant game changer. And if, maybe we'll never get to that point if we increase our focus on cybersecurity today.
Right. Well, I certainly do hope that we never get to that point, but as you mentioned, we really appreciate you sharing that insight and your experience. It's evident that we have our work cut out for us as an industry, but at least we have some actionable steps that we can take to protect our organizations as well as the patients that we serve. We did have one last request, and that was to get more information that is industry specific. So I'm just going to invite everyone who's listening in. If you want industry-specific information about cybersecurity and how you can go about a risk management plan, please join us at the Cybersecurity Summit that we're having October 24th and 25th. And we'd also like to invite you to join us for our next Third Thursday Lunch and Learn on September 21st, when we welcome FDA officials, Captain Brenda Stoddart of CEDAR. She is the Director of Small Business and Industry Assistance Program, and Elias Malice, who is the CDRH Director Division of Small Manufacturers, International, and Consumer Assistance. They will be sharing all the resources that they have that are available to you each and every day. So Jerry, thank you so much for joining us, and everyone who's listening, thank you as well. Have a great day.